Season 4 of Notebook on Cities and Culture is brought to you by Daniel Murphy, Polar Inertia, a journal of nomadic and popular culture online at polarinertia.com, and by Press Up, friendly web consultants who listen to your goals and provide solutions that make sense. Online at pressupinc.com.
From behind, I was almost swallowed whole by the thrill of the fight. It wasn't for the money, and it wasn't just for fun. I wanted to make a mind. I just wanted to be someone. I heard the devil whisper in my ear. He made his message clear when he said, "Sweep the leg, Johnny. Sweep the leg, Johnny, sweep the leg, Johnny."
How good is our era? How good is now a time to be into zombies?
I think it's probably the best time to be into zombies. They're no longer marginalized as they were when they first came out. It seems to be they've hit mainstream finally, the way that maybe vampires did a little while ago. This is probably the best time to be into zombies.
How much is going on zombie-wise? There's TV shows, How many ways have zombies infiltrated the culture?
Well, I think there's a breakfast cereal. No, I don't know about that, but there's definitely a TV series, at least one right now, The Walking Dead, but I think there are talks for another one. There are tons of films. There are graphic novels and comics. There are stories. There are even crossover stories, like there's a Jane Austen, remake with zombie. You know what I mean? So they're even infiltrating classic literature at this point.
Oh my God, the video games.
Video games. That's the biggest area. Especially now. We were talking earlier about, the rise of indie games. Indie developers being able to make games. And I think zombie games are the biggest core of indie games even now. Survival specifically.
It's here, by the way, in the currently zombie-free city of Los Angeles. I'm speaking with Pete Mitchell. He is the lead singer and co-founder of the band No More Kings. He's an artist, he's an animator, a game designer, and a zombie enthusiast. Which of those things came first in your life?
Wow, maybe zombie enthusiast, actually, and I blame my mom for that. She sort of raised me on horror movies.
It's a rare thing to say.
Yes, it is.
Usually it's not the mom. Usually it's not the parents. And definitely not the mom. So how was your mom different?
My mom was nuts. In addition to that, in the late 70s, Dungeons & Dragons came out. And there was a huge push against it from parents because everybody was afraid that it was demonic and it was, it was killing their kids and all this stuff.
Kids are going to kill themselves when they die in the game because they don't know the difference anymore. The mazes and monsters were too much for them.
Yep, that's exactly right. And I guess maybe there was one instance where that happened.
This is a really razor blade in the apple and Halloween thing. No, I don't think. That thing doesn't exist, but it got made into a meme in a way, an early meme.
Absolutely, yeah. It was a way for parents to control that situation. That was right around the time where my mom bought me my first Dungeons & Dragons, player's handbook and, the whole basic set, and she was my DM.
Brown box or the advanced Dungeons & Dragons?
Yeah.
Or?
Oh, no, we started with the regular, where an elf was a class and a race. But yeah, my mom was my first DM, so she did not care about those things. She threw me headlong into this stuff.
What does it take to make an interest like zombies? I mean, this whole thing won't be about zombies, but, some people are into zombies and horror movies as kids, and they say, well, I grew out of that. They put it behind them. Some can find a way to make zombies, to keep zombies and things like that relevant in their life, how do you adultify something as seemingly adolescent-oriented in your own life, like zombies?
Well, how do I specifically, or how does one?
How do you? Let's start that way.
Well, I mean, society at large is doing the same thing with superheroes now and comic books. I think there's a bunch of stuff that was perfect for a 13-year-old version of myself, which, most normal humans outgrow. For me, my perspective changed on it, but especially with No More Kings, because writing those first two albums, all I was digging from was nostalgia for myself and my past. And the
first one you call a love letter to the 80s, right?
Absolutely, exactly. And so for me, that was how I folded it into my new adult life. It became almost a subject of research. It became an inspiration starting point.
Your own childhood.
My own childhood, exactly. And luckily, I grew up mostly in the 80s, and so that time period is just, I mean, I feel bad for anyone who didn't grow up in the 80s. It was the best time to grow up. There was so much rich stuff going on there.
I had the tail end of it, but what did I miss by being born in 1984, I guess?
Well, no, not much. You missed, you were too young to understand the Karate Kid. You were...
We're getting to the Karate Kid.
Oh, okay, sorry. You mean to jump the gun on that. No, I just think a lot of the stuff that you saw in reruns, that you saw as like, oh yeah, that must have been cool. It was for me. It was made for me.
Right, you might have had an Intellivision or something.
Right.
What did you have?
My dad got us a 2600 first. And then that was the only video game console I had. I didn't get any of the other ones, ColecoVision or Intellivision. But then we got the VIC-20 and the Commodore 64.
Creme de la creme.
Oh my God, dude! And we subscribed. I forget what magazine it was. It might have been Commodore magazine. But every issue had the thousands of lines of code that you could type in to make your own game.
So I did that as well. Yeah, just manually. There was a time when we had a magazine printout of all the code of a game and typed it in by hand.
And that's the only way you could play games.
Because we enjoyed it.
Yes, and we walked both uphill both ways.
Could you save the code after you typed it in? Because in my case, on my Texas Instruments 99 4A, I couldn't save it. I typed it in, I could run it, and if I wanted to play it again later, I'd be typing it in again.
Yeah, and that's thousands of lines of code. No, the Commodore 64 you could not. The 128D, which I later got, you could because it had a tape drive.
How long did that take to save something?
15 minutes probably. And if you tried to play
get a sandwich.
Yes, and it was sequential. So if you wrote another game, you would have to save it after that one, and so you'd have to rewind and look for the gaps in between. And that must be my game.
Right. Anybody who did that type of thing, making games, or even just computing of any kind that long ago, has these stories about how much easier it is now, how much you can do now. But it ties in with one of the reasons that I've got into your music. I've got into No More Kings. I mean, as a public persona, you're best known as the co-creator, the lead singer of this band, No More Kings. But I first came to know your work about 20 years ago on the internet when I found computer games you'd made even back then with this application, a terrible application, Game-Maker, Game-Maker. But you made games that used its just draconian limitations well. The Incompetent Ninja, this platformer with an incompetent ninja, or a puzzle game. What was it called? Popa?
Oh man, I don't remember that one.
It was really cool. It was a puzzle game, but Game-Maker, sucked, right? What was it like?
It was total, not drag and drop, literally, because I don't think you could drag stuff then, but it was essentially the plug-in.
No mouse asked, none given, I think.
Exactly. No, it was, a bunch of stock components and these stock behaviors. You were pointing out earlier that, you couldn't even, your idle pose didn't even face whatever your last direction was. It resorted to forward no matter what. Your
guy had to face, picture a side-scroller, listeners. Your guy has to face you, the player, while stopped. He can't just be looking left or right. And this is just one of the many aggravations of Game-Maker.
Yeah, exactly. So now if you're being attacked from one of those sides, you have to press the button to turn and face, and then a separate button to throw your ninja star at him. Yeah. But yeah.
Based on the direction you want to throw the ninja star.
Oh, absolutely. If you hit the wrong direction, you would, poop it out your butt, and it would fly and miss everybody.
Which you made cool, because this ninja, the incompetent ninja, could throw either direction, so you could jump one way while throwing a star the other way. And I was playing this and realizing at an early age, not articulating it to myself, but this is art because it's so limited. Limitations make art. It's commonly said, and you were able to work with those limitations to artistically make a playable game. Were you thinking at all of the art born of limits? Necessity is the mother of invention while making the incompetent ninja back in the 90s?
Not at all. I think the funny thing about those kinds of things is they happen on their own. They just sort of happen. You don't at least I didn't realize these were limitations, and I didn't realize then that they were making the work better. But later on you look at things, and now I feel almost, this sounds like I'm an old man, but I feel bad for people because You can do anything right now with a laptop or even your cell phone. You can make an entire film on your cell phone right now.
Whether games, films, music, anything you're making, you can do whatever you want.
Yep, exactly. And now there's a problem. It's like going to too big of a buffet. You can get overwhelmed by those choices. And I think the nice
eat all the bread first and you're done. The classic mistake.
And then you've got no room for the pudding.
Yes, that's what they want you to do.
Exactly, because that's where they make the money is the pudding. Wait, what? So exactly, that's this. But later you find out that those limitations are actually what made you a better artist and what made you stronger. And I have to impose limitations on myself because there aren't any. Yeah. So I'll say, all right, my next album is going to be made entirely with this loopy app, or I'm going to do a series of art where, I have to use these filters from Instagram. I don't know, these are bad examples, but not having those limitations being imposed by the technology now because the technology is so good, I have to force those limitations on myself as an artist, or I'm going to suffer from that overload of too many choices.
So you're, of course, now still a game designer. We'll talk about the games you've done more recently, but as I say, you're in No More Kings. You are an artist. At the time, 20 years ago, toiling away in Game Maker, were you thinking, yeah, I'm gonna be an artist. I may be making some games, but were you thinking generally visual artist was the way to go?
Yeah, absolutely. I studied painting in college, and so I really thought I was going to be one of those guys that just showed my works in galleries. And pretty quickly I realized that that's not the world for me. And
but it's still an interesting aspiration to be at that young an age. I mean, what were you seeing around you that made you realize that was possible?
That's a really good question. I think I don't know that I didn't have a particularly cultured upbringing, so I don't think there was anything like that. I think I just really liked making pictures, and then by the time I got to college and chose that as my what I was going to study, my path, my professors would take me to galleries, and so I would see all this work in galleries, and I would think this would be so cool to do a series of paintings and then have them be showed here, and the whole wine and cheese thing. I ended up when I first moved out to Los Angeles, I ended up making a bunch of. I lived in a loft space, a huge loft space, and my roommate was a photographer.
Where was the loft?
It was on Beverly Boulevard, not quite downtown and not quite, just somewhere in between.
It's like a historic Filipino town type area, or?
I don't know if it's that now. It was Vermont and Beverly, basically. So just sort of...
You were by like that bowling alley.
Yeah, exactly. I want to drive by there now and see what my place has become, but...
The bowling alley's still there.
Oh, is it? Yeah. I should rent that. But it was really cool because the space was big enough that we could host, every few months we would have an art opening, and I would do, 20 paintings, and my roommate would do a couple photographs, and we'd put stuff up.
So complete DIY down to the openings.
Absolutely, and that's the problem is I sold nothing because of it, but it was...
You were inviting penniless friends over.
Yes, and feeding them, but it was...
$200 in the hole at the end.
Oh my God, I wish it was only that much. No, they probably cost me around $3,000 to $4,000 each to throw.
What costs so much? And what was the main expense of that kind of event?
The main expense, I think it broke down pretty big. I mean, catering was a couple hundred, so that wasn't that much.
We were going pro with catering.
We were going pro. We catered and had wine and cheese, and full thing. We would sometimes hire a DJ. We would just the cost of dressing the place, and then the cost of making the work. I mean, I was painting huge back then. I was painting like 5-6 foot canvases, and so those are a couple $100 each. So it just added up. Oh, and then promotion. We would send out 3 mailers. We had a pretty good mailing list.
Physical paper mail.
Actual, yeah, and they were. Oof, man, we stayed up like 4 nights making these things. One of the shows was called War. It was based on a series of 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse that I've been obsessed with my whole life. And so I chose that Horseman, the Horseman of War, to do this one show on. So for the mailer, it was a Ziploc baggie filled with a postcard, a hand-painted army guy.
Stuff in it.
Yeah, with stuff inside of it. So that's part of what made the mailer so much.
You can't get the bulk rate with that stuff, can you?
No. And again, it was fun. It was fun to do, and I'm sure maybe it was fun to receive those things, but like a cost-benefit analysis, if I were to do that now, I would never do that now.
Right. Well, a cost-benefit analysis for that thing, but could there be some way that the grander cost-benefit works in your favor, like the coolness of that thing, whether it's just as a memory or the other things it connected you to, other people, those always galvanize something, don't they? Or you have to figure out how to make them galvanize something else.
No, I think both things are true. I think they you're right about that. That sort of happens, and if I had the stamina to keep doing it, who knows what it could have grown into. But you're right. The second half of that is you choose what to make of that, right? And so for me, it was perfect. It forced me to make a ton of art, which I would not have done otherwise probably. I'm a guy that needs deadlines probably or something.
Everyone does. Some admit it and some don't.
I guess that's true. I guess you're right. Because without that, you're just going to keep picking at something and it's never going to be done, right?
You might as well make it perfect and die of liver spots doing it like 80 years later.
Exactly. I forget who said this and I wish I remembered, but someone said paintings are never finished, they're just abandoned. And I think that's probably true of any art, even music. I don't finish a song, I just stop working on it at some point.
It's another limitation. It's no different than the limitations of Game Maker that it imposes on you. The limitations of time you have to impose on yourself. That's kind of the hard part, right?
No, absolutely. Yeah, you're right. You have time and then money and then whatever other resources there are. But in addition to creative limitations, like I'm going to do an album just about karate or whatever, like you can put thematic limitations on yourself, but then there are actual hard-coded limitations of how much physical energy and time and space you have to work on this thing.
Just to annoy me, the living dead are keeping me up at night. They're hanging around outside. They're probably mad they died. The living dead are gathering in the streets. I'm buried beneath my sheets. They're making it hard to sleep. Scratching, scraping, bones they're making. My head is aching now. Walls are breaking, walls are shaking, and they're breaking down. Birds are crying all night long in my wings, in their tattered clothing, and the pot is growing.
You mentioned doing these DIY openings after moving to Los Angeles. So what was it like? I'm curious what it's like to grow up in Rhode Island.
I think I got out. Maybe I would have gotten out a little sooner. It was good. I'm glad I grew up there. Everybody has, their own sort of unique growth experience depending on where they were born. But it's not a place for me that I could thrive as a musician and an artist.
Who thrives in Rhode Island?
You know what? I honestly don't know at this point. I mean, I go back very infrequently, so it's weird because about the time I left, there was a cool movement happening downtown, which happens in a lot of places, for artists. Lofts started popping up. There was incentives for people to move in and have these live workspaces.
Is everybody cool in Providence? Is this like Iceland where everyone's in Reykjavik?
I don't know. There's a really cool sort of indie art and music movement in Providence. I don't know if that's still the case, but it was when I left. So probably if I had stayed, I would have gotten deeper involved in that, and I would have been fine. Everything would have been fine. But in my head, I thought, L.A. That's where I got to go.
Well, this is the ultimate choice, right? I mean, you choose your pond size. Is it big fish, small pond? Is it the other way around? But to that, I always say, yeah, I guess you can be a big fish in a small pond, or a small fish in a big pond, or a fish of any size in those respective ponds. But let's face this fact. The big pond is more interesting. No matter what size you are, the pond itself is more interesting.
Absolutely. And the truth is, if you're in the small pond and you are the big fish, there aren't that many other fish around. And so you're not getting inspired by other things. I think
small ponds breed some weird grievances, and it's just in Santa Barbara it was this way when I used to live there. It's like that city the greater area only has 500,000 people in it. So what percentage are involved in cool stuff? And then think of the rivalries and just, yeah, right?
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. And then you move to a bigger place and suddenly those things disappear because there are a lot more people on your team,
Right. And the place is too big for people to have sustained beefs as well.
Yeah, there's no territorial boundaries anymore. You're absolutely right though. When you're in a small place, if you're the acoustic coffee shop duo, like Neil and I were for a while,
your bandmate in No More Kings.
Yes, yep, Neil the Great. Then that's the plot of grass you've peed on. You know, that's the one you've marked as yours.
You got to stand in it.
You have to stand in your own pee. And that's Providence. No, I'm just kidding. No, I mean, again, I loved it for growing up there. I loved the friends that I made. I loved my experience. I just, for me, I felt like the next step was exactly what you said. I needed to get into that bigger pond, and not even as a career or growth thing. I wanted to be around that. I wanted to be around that bigger stuff.
I would imagine in growing up in Rhode Island, though, and especially in Providence, when somebody talks about I want to step it up, they say New York. They don't say Los Angeles. Is that true?
Yeah, I guess that's probably true. And if the weather were nicer in New York, I would have picked New York. I've been to New York. For me, it was. I'd been to New York a bunch of times, and I love it. I love the gallery scene there. I love how exciting it is. My problem also is I'm kind of exactly in the middle of introvert extrovert, and so I get very
vert at that point.
I'm just a vert, yeah. So I always felt like I was in somebody's way in New York, you know. And there's so much more space in LA. And we were just talking about this. No one walks, and so you have kind of
changing. I walk.
That's true. No, and I'm excited about that, but I don't know that it'll ever get as dense as New York is.
No, nobody walks across Los Angeles. Like, let's face it, it's too big to walk across the length. Like, I mean, nobody walks across New York per se, but Manhattan, you can do it.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. Manhattan has become. There's no Manhattan here. There's downtown LA, there's Koreatown, there's Santa Monica, there's all these little pockets, but you kind of.
It's a double-edged sword. Like, it's also good, but yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but again, I think the thing for me. Well, also at the time. I really wanted to make films. I really thought I was going to be a filmmaker. I had gotten my degree in painting, and I realized that I wasn't going to become a gallery showing painter. I realized that. And so I thought, well, the next thing I want to explore is making films. And I really wanted to get into a grad program out here as part of the UC, and I wanted to establish residency so it would cost less. And then I got out here and started working in the video games industry, and by the time I was ready to go to grad school, a coworker of mine was like, what are you talking about? Why would you waste your time doing that? Why don't you just make art? She's like, what are you going to learn in school that you can't just learn making it? And I thought,
it's the 21st century. You can just do stuff.
Well, that's it. That was profoundly changing for me. And what I love about what's happening now, online is people are exactly doing that. They're realizing I can just make a video game, or I can just make a graphic novel or an album or whatever it is. I can make anything I want by myself.
Right. I'll go back to the Game Maker days 20 years ago. And after discovering your games, I think I saw on your site, I was, I guess, one of the earliest people among No More Kings fans today to hear about No More Kings, because on your site where your Game Maker games were, there was like a little blurb about No More Kings, like a hand-drawn No More Kings image. Like, this is, I got a band, by the way, No More Kings, but because it was 1995, you couldn't like play a YouTube video. God knows, you couldn't even. Maybe you would have had a real audio stream, but even that was just a pain in the ass. So if I was going to hear No More Kings, I'd have to go to a show of yours, if you were even doing them then, or like somehow get, not a CD, because we're making CDRs. Like, what was the state of No More Kings in 1995?
No, that's exactly it. You had to come see us at a coffee shop. No More Kings back then, we played almost exclusively at college events. You know, we would play at either my college or some. And we actually did really well. Weirdly, I made more money back then from No More Kings than I have ever made once getting professionally signed to a label.
This is the story of the music industry, like in microcosm.
No, it honestly is. It honestly is. Like, if you can do it on your own, do it on your own. Because once you, well, but you know, whatever. I could make a list of pros and cons. If I hadn't signed to a record label, I would never have made the Super Like video, which I know we're gonna get to. But like, that did it for me. You know, like I would have always plateaued at that level, I think, you know, just because of resources, you know. But yeah, back then, that was really your only option, was to go see a show. We didn't
just go to Providence. I mean, I was in Seattle at the time, but hey, yes.
How the heck did you find... I'm still amazed that anybody besides someone that I physically showed a Game Maker game to would even have discovered those things.
It's a really good question, but at the time, I was so... I mean, like I don't know if this is your story, but growing up playing video games, we both grew up playing video games. You know, I think we have the same impulse where if we like something, we then want to make it. Liking something equals wanting to make that thing. Like, there's no question that that's the impulse. Like,
that's exactly.
I like this, therefore I'll do it myself.
Yeah.
So, as a kid, I mean, I was literally 10 when I was emailing with you about your Game Maker games, and I was always trying to find a way to make I was trying to always find the easy way to make a computer game. Like, maybe there was some shortcut where I didn't have to code or didn't have to like spend a lot of time. There wasn't one, really, but I would look for I just spent hours and hours on a dial-up modem trying to find what games people like me, like not necessarily kids like me, but like people who weren't professional game creators were making. And so look hard enough, you find everything, especially at that time. You know, the Yahoo directory will hook you up. But, and, you know, I'd find these kind of flaky game-making applications like Game-Maker, and, you know, yours were impressive, but because they were complete. Like, I burnt through so many ways to try to make computer games, but I could never finish them. Or like I was really into drawing comics, but I could never finish anything I started. Or like making film projects later. I could always start things. I was really good at starting things, but they would always fall away. You seem to have some advantage in adolescence over me as far as getting things actually done. How did you manage to finish stuff?
Man, you are hitting on something that this is the crux of it right here. Like, no, it's funny. I've been beating myself up over the past couple months about this exact thing. I don't know what. Maybe I always go through this sine wave of rise and fall, but I feel the same way that you must have felt. I feel like I am so good at starting things and I'm so bad at finishing things.
We're just leaving in our wake a trail of just of parts of projects.
Yes. And when we started, we had the best intentions. They were going to be the greatest things. And you're right. Now we just look back behind our boat, and there's just, you know, flotsam and jetsam of all these old, dead, you know, discarded carcasses of projects.
But you hit on it, because I think I'd envision a game I wanted to make, and I'd be like, oh, this will be the best thing. So my expectations shot up, ratcheted up. This is going to be great. And when I'm not even going to say I started it and it wasn't great. I just started it, and the drag of the idea of how great it was going to be was enough to just make me forget about it.
Yeah, no, that's it. And maybe for you at that time and for that project, that was enough. You know, maybe you got what you needed out of it.
Maybe this is just how 11-years are. I don't know.
Well, that's the other thing. You're putting a lot of pressure on yourself. I mean, yeah, you're 11. You're supposed to do something for 20 minutes and then move on. And this is the other thing I realized. I had this conversation with my girlfriend recently, because I don't think a lot of people understand this. You have to be obsessive. You have to almost be weird, you know, to get these things done, because like a normal 11-year-old doesn't lock himself in his room and finish a game about a ninja. You know, like normal 11-year-olds are running around playing outside with their friends. I saw an interview with Francis Ford Coppola talking about this. He was 14 in this one period of his life where he locked himself in his room for 3 weeks. His parents fed him by sliding food under the door. It was like a prison, and he just worked on a screenplay. Wow. And he said, you know, he's like, I realized I wanted to have an extraordinary life, so I had to be an extraordinary person. And the reason that struck me is I realized I can't do the things that normal people do. I can't, or else I will never finish something. I will never have a project that I'm proud of.
Right, yeah. You know, having jobs, eating actual food sometimes. But you know, it's funny you mention that, because in the last few months I've grown kind of fixated on reading about these obsessed people who are so dedicated to whatever craft it is they have. Like, there was that documentary, Jiro Dreams of Sushi, a while back, with the Japanese sushi chef who does only that in life. Like, I think that's not an exaggeration. He only makes sushi. Or I was reading about, I don't know if you saw, do you know who Shane Carruth is? He's made this time travel movie, Primer, a few years ago, and Upstream Color more recently.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet.
And he describes himself as obsessive and will freely admit his weirdness, but the obsession itself, it converts into something interesting for other people almost automatically. Like the work of art, whatever it may be, is almost like the obsession made into a thing experienceable for others. Does that make sense? Or I think of it in terms of, like, you take your time, like there's a chunk of time you have, and you squeeze this hundreds and hundreds of hours chunk of time into like a little ball, and that you pass that on to your audience, and they have this distilled version of the time you spent. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
It's the diamond that gets compressed from all the coal of your time. And the thing is, usually people don't have those diamonds themselves. You know, most people don't look in their own bedroom and see a bunch of graphic novels that they finished. So they look to these other people who make these things, and they enjoy these things. But what they don't realize is the other thing that you just said, the amount of obsessive toiling, the things that you had to say no to, the friends you had to ignore, the night you didn't go out. You know, like, they don't realize all that stuff. And most people think that want to dabble in that stuff. They think, oh, I want to be a musician, or I want to be an artist, or I want to do these things, or I want to be an animator. I had a lot of friends that say that. They don't actually want everything that comes with that. They want the finished product, but they don't want all the work.
I want to have been an animator.
Yeah, exactly. Without the memory of all the hours, you know. And I think what's weird about me, not weird about me, but what I'm starting to become disappointed in is I'm actually not obsessive enough, I feel like. I feel like I'm...
That's the nature of the obsessive, is they always think they're not obsessive enough, right?
Really?
I don't know. Do you know any obsessives?
No, yeah, I do. Huh.
They've got to be thinking, I could always do a little more. I could be doing more. I could be doing more.
You're probably right about that. I think maybe that's a human nature thing, that we always want to push ourselves further. It's a Faustian, like... Yes. But for me, because I think... You know, I look at these things and I know that I would be further along in any of these projects. I would have many more things finished if I would have obsessed a little further about it instead of jumping ship and moving on to something else.
But then you come into the zone where it's like, you realize now, looking back a bit, the visual art, the music, the game design, they all go together. You know, the game design is the best example. If you're making a game yourself, you can make the music, you can make the art, you can do a lot of it, like without... In a weird way, without all of the pursuits that were distracting you from the other ones, you wouldn't be able to pull them together into one product now, would you?
No, that's a really good point. And that's, I think, that's the dilemma, right? We're always going to wish, it's the grass is greener thing. I'm always going to wish I was more obsessive, but in the truth, I can't be anybody but myself. And the things that I'm annoyed at myself about, this scatterbrained idea that we're talking about, is exactly what you said. It makes me actually unique. It makes me able to make these products. The fact that I am attracted to all of these disciplines that seem separate means I can pull them together into one product and make this thing myself. No, you're right.
You have to believe there's an overlap. Like, you have to believe there's a common core that you're going to be able to tap into and obsess over that, whatever it is, right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I think the best cases, the case study is video games, you're right. But then also, I used to think animation would be a great fit for me for that same reason, because I love... You know, visually, I love painting, I love drawing, I love making these pictures, and then I love the music, I love writing, I love doing these voices. Like, all those things could happen. No, I think you're right. I think it's fruitless for me to sit there and think about how things would be if I were a different personality type. Like, I am this, and I make these kinds of things, and that's cool.
Now it's wall to wall, watch your foes are falling, but it's time to pause, cause Mother Nature's calling. I'll be back in a second, and I'll continue the reckoning. They will still be waiting for us, and the pressure grows to make a save and throw, to introduce some who we turn the lights down low. My armor's exposed, I'm getting full of holes, think I need another chorus. Sooner or later, these eyes land on the table, you know that's what tables are made of. Everybody sing, oh yeah, it's critical hit. Let me do the double damage with this. Everybody sing, oh yeah, it's critical hit. This is critical hit. I'm laying down double damage with it. Oh yeah, it's critical hit. I'm making the double damage with this. Everybody sing, oh yeah, it's critical hit. It's critical, critical. That ain't how we roll.
Flash forward from that mid-90s time, 95 or so, playing the Incompetent Ninja to, let's say, like 12 years, 2000... Was that 12 years? 1995 to 2007? Yes. To 2007, 2008, I'm working in a radio station in Santa Barbara and see on a stack in one of, like, it was like this radio station complex. One of the stations I wasn't working at had a stack of, like, mail that just came in. On the top, lo and behold, I see a CD, a No More Kings CD, actually. It's like, is that the same? No way. And, you know, I pick it up and it's the Sweep the Leg video, which we've alluded to. The video where, this has been much discussed, but where you and others got the Karate Kid cast back together, and it's the thing that people know No More Kings for usually, right?
Yeah, that's there are very few exceptions to that. Usually when someone tells me about their first experience with No More Kings, it's from that video. Someone showed them that video.
Wasn't that JPEG on your website?
No, it wasn't the crudely drawn Game-Maker. No. Yeah, that's really amazing to me for you to have that path to this, like to have known me and stuff I did that far back to actually watching No More Kings be like a germ of an idea, and then later seeing that thing appear. Yeah, that's really... And it's weird.
Because I would have bet anything that was the No More Kings was like, oh, that was just some band that guy had. There's no such thing as No More Kings anymore.
Yeah,
gone.
Exactly.
If it ever began.
Right. Yeah. Maybe it was like. Well, and there's plenty of those too. I'm sure.
That was that guy's high school band. But then I was like, how many bands could be named No More Kings? And then I looked. I was like, wow, it's the same dude. Yeah. I mean, was this? It wasn't continuous though. I mean, the history of No More Kings was not unbroken from '95 to 2008, right?
That's right. It was. We moved. I moved to Los Angeles in about 97, 98. So just a couple years after we started No More Kings, we stopped No More Kings. And then while I
Which
was
is where I would have expected the story to end.
Me too. And in fact, I thought it did end there. And I would have definitely gone on to do some other musical projects that would have been just as short-lived, I'm sure. And probably not as good. The difference is we never properly recorded an album. And Neil's brother Adam, who played bass with us sometimes, knew that. And that's always been a pet peeve of his, is that we never got a chance to record a proper album.
Just to have it in hand.
Just to have it, just to know what that would have sounded like, just to put it in your car and be able to listen to it, you know? So Neil's brother Adam ended up making a lot of money in a, advertising, in an online marketing thing at a time where that was relatively new. Flash websites were new.
When there was really gold in them there hills.
There was actually, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, now the rivers run dry. There's really nothing there. But that's not what he wanted to do with his life. So he turned that money into, his passion for music, and he started a record label. He bit off more than he could chew, and the label didn't last very long. But while it was there, his first thought was, let's properly record a No More Kings album. That's as far as we thought about it. We didn't think about touring. We didn't think about a video. We didn't think about any of that stuff. We just thought, let's just make a real album. Let's just do that. And so
it's like a get the band back together thing. Like let's reform and make an album.
It's the Blues Brothers, exactly. And the weird thing about it was, Adam wasn't one of the writing. He wasn't a writer. It was just Neil and I. So it was really, it's always been sort of a studio project anyway, or like a They Might Be Giants kind of thing, where there's two core people, and then, we get other musicians to come and fill in. But he just really wanted to have that experience, and so we did it. And then it just grew. We got really lucky by getting this song in the hands of Billy Zabka, who then, it was his brainchild to make the video, and then that.
He played Johnny in The Karate Kid.
Yep, exactly. Well, the weird thing to me, and I'm skipping ahead a little bit here, but I've been incredibly lucky in that when I write these songs about these characters or about these people, like I've written, that song from the perspective of Johnny, which a lot of people, that's a weird perspective to take, because the movie is about Ralph Macchio. The movie is about Dan.
The guy Ralph Macchio beats.
Yeah, exactly. Why would you write a song about him, But I thought that was a more interesting angle, so I chose that. Anyway, I write these songs about these characters. I wrote a song about Bruce Lee. I wrote a song about Night of the Living Dead. In all these cases, the person who the song is about got to hear the song and has liked it. Like, Johnny, the guy that played Johnny, heard the song, liked it, made a video about it. Bruce Lee's daughter, Shannon, heard the song I wrote about her dad and loved it. Judith O'Day, who played Barbara from Night of the Living Dead, heard They're Coming to Get You, Barbara, the song I wrote about her character, loved it. It's such a weird... what planet do I live on where that's possible?
Had you done it in 1995, too, unless they came through Providence, good luck.
No, they wouldn't have, unless they typed...
Pre-Twitter, it'd be pretty hard.
Yeah, they could have typed into the Yahoo search directory, maybe,
yes. But... No results.
GeoCities, or whatever.
Tripod, Angel Fire, and so on. The list goes on. But do you think that tapping into... Because No More Kings tapped into a vein of 80s nostalgia that was really... still is robust. Was that just coincidental? Was there some sense of, this is the right time to do something 80s related?
No, I never thought about it that deeply, and maybe I should have. Maybe things...
You don't want to be the 80s pop culture band forever either.
Well, what's weird? I really, because, Sweep the Light came out, and then our next single was Michael Jump In, which is the Knight Rider song, and we had a video for that. I actually, at that time, was nervous about that. I thought, crap, am I digging too, am I painting myself into a corner here where
what am I going to get down to in 10 years?
There's not going to be a Goonies song. What's left? Actually, I should write a Goonies song.
Yeah. There's still time on that one.
There's still time. So yeah, I was afraid of that, and then since that point, I've realized how silly that was to be worried about that. What do I care? If people are digging the songs, then that's what matters. So yeah, I'll continue to write. Anyway, but back to your question, I never deliberately thought about that. I literally was writing about the stuff that I dug as a kid, which I still kind of dig. And what I've realized since then is, without trying this, almost everybody who is a No More Kings fan likes the same stuff I like. They like zombies, they like video games, they like, comics, they like the X-Men, they like the same stuff.
That became the definition of a No More Kings fan, in the sense it evolved to encompass that sector of the population.
And that's what I love, is it really, and that's why it's perfect. Going back to what you said about, you make this thing where it encompasses all of the disparate things that you're interested in, right? I'm worried that I didn't focus on any one of these things, but what I'm realizing is No More Kings is the perfect example of my love of all of this stuff, my ability as a visual artist, my ability as a storyteller, in addition to my ability as a singer. Who knows? If it were a different band situation, that might be all I had was my ability to sing. That'd be the only thing anybody knows about. But in this case, I tapped into a whole audience of people that like the same stuff I like. These are a bunch of like-minded people, really.
It brings to mind sort of the way that it's changing these days what subculture is. I remember William Gibson, the guy who wrote Neuromancer and is like the father of cyberpunk in a lot of ways. He said maybe a decade ago or more, he thought, subculture based on geography is over. Like, there's no more Seattles, no more Austins. Subcultures don't form that way, musically or otherwise anymore. He says now it's about not specificity of geographical area, but of interest. And another form of specificity is, you can be into reenacting one battle of the Civil War, or you can be into the overlap of zombies and the 1980s and video games. In a way, that is sort of a new Seattle. In a way, like where those all cross, that part of the Venn diagram is where a subculture forms, isn't it?
That is exactly right. And what's interesting about that is any one of those things on its own would be fine. That would be a special interest group, right? That would form a club, so to speak.
Zombies is getting to be the majority, I think.
It definitely is beating out all the others. Even, 80s nostalgia was a big thing for a while. A lot of television shows were spoofing that.
They're on to about 1994 now. They're going to get up to Incompetent Ninja era, I think.
Oh man, that'd be cool. God, I want to find that game. But what I think
they still run Game Maker games. Get DOSBox.
Goodness, that'd be so cool. Yeah, I gotta look that up. But what's interesting to me about what you just said is if you're in the Venn diagram where those things overlap, zombies, 80s nostalgia, and video games, then you're going to be a No More Kings fan. And if you're not yet, someone is going to send you something. Like it's sort of inevitable because that's so again, like you said with the William Gibson quote, like. That is so niche and so specific now of a little club that is formed about people who like all those things. If you are a friend of someone who that likes that stuff, you're going to forward them that stuff. Like that's
completely socially driven.
Yeah, that's how stuff gets shared now, I feel like. And you're right, it's not geographically based anymore because those boundaries are gone.
Right. But in a way, some people take this pretty far. Technological types say, well, geography now doesn't matter at all. And this was a big thing to say maybe around a decade ago as well. Now it's kind of tilting the other way. Weirdly, geography matters again in a different way. Like it's still important to be in or near a place like Los Angeles, right? To you? To me, it seems more important than ever. And I don't know why. Somehow the internet has made where you are less important and then more important in a different way. I don't know if you felt the same.
No, I 100% agree. I feel like because those walls came down and you can, like in my case, I can work from anywhere, that takes away a little bit of the specialness of it. And now what I need I need other people. I need the club. I need the other people the peer group, So I need to be in a place like Los Angeles or like Tokyo or like Nashville or one of those places where like-minded people are going to gather, where I can go to a Jones Coffee and hang out, and there are other people with their laptop making a video game, or there's, there's somebody with a sketchbook drawing zombies. Like now more than ever, I need to be around that stuff.
Right, and everyone else as well. We get our fill of connection in the way we can get it on the net, but then we realize, this is only half the equation, right?
That's exactly right. That word connection has become a really important word to me lately. I realized there's a lot of, depending on what you believe spiritually or whatever, there's always a question in everybody's mind, why the heck am I here? What is the purpose to all of this? You look back over civilization and is this any better? Are we any better off now? But the idea of connecting to another human and the idea that I can connect with other people who like zombies as much as I do. The idea that I could connect with people that also thought that Johnny was not the bad guy of the Karate Kid. Like people that share the same theses as me. Like the same likes, the same interests. That connection that lets me know I'm not alone. I'm not alone in my thoughts. I'm not alone in this world. I'm not the only one who sees things this way. That's so important, and I think that is what we're maybe getting at with as these walls come down and as you can be anywhere geographically and as the internet sort of unites us, we're missing that actual, real tangible connection with another human.
Until we realize we need to find it, and it's pretty easily acquirable again. It's not gone.
No, absolutely not. And yeah, you're absolutely right. The difference is now we have to close our laptop and go to the coffee shop, or we have to we're making those connections online. It's funny, I remember reading a thing the joke is that old people are like, oh, kids are always on their cell phones. They're not even having real conversations anymore. And you realize what they're doing on their cell phone is having real conversations.
Right.
Like that's what people are using technology for.
Segues seamlessly into a real life conversation as well. It's not different. That's what we need to underscore. Is it's all one conversation.
Exactly. And it's very sort of closed-minded to think of that as like any less real of a connection than But having said that, there's something nice about face-to-face communication. That's why I enjoy that you do. You easily could have done this via Skype or over this telephone. I know that you maybe did in the past.
Yeah, I used to do that in the previous iteration of the show, but then I realized because I was forced by circumstances, moving to a place where I wasn't working at a radio station, to be like, okay, what can I do now? Oh, always face-to-face.
I think that's huge. That's a great way to not only distinguish, but it also you're going to get different material because
conversations are better, to be honest.
Absolutely. Being in a real physical space for one thing, and then there's so much of our conversations that it's funny. We see this happen all the time with text or with just the miscommunication when you don't have a facial expression to match something, or you don't have body language to match something, or tone, intonation.
Especially when one person's not a native speaker,
God, yeah. No, you get some pretty crazy misunderstandings. Three's Company style misunderstandings can happen.
If I didn't have gestures when I'm speaking other languages, I'd just be...
Yeah?
all I would be doing is making faux pas all day long. I'd be like blacklisted from everything in other languages. In English...
No, because they forgive us. They forgive us because we don't know what the heck we're doing.
Slipping through the city in the back of a limousine. You're a spy with your collarbone in the foreign time zone, grinning through the nicotine. You're cool as a cucumber, looking for the showrunner with a new identity. You're a loaded revolver with the safety off, and it's time for a reckoning. You're a bullet just until it hits a target. You're the one that makes him wonder, can he dodge it? It's time to get your suit on. To keep your gun drawn. We're all expecting you. The camera frames the view. They're playing your theme song. Now you're the new James Bond.
When I was mentioning the sort of list of obsessives I myself was obsessing about, from Jiro in Tokyo making sushi to Shane Carruth to... There's this profile of Jerry Seinfeld I reread occasionally where it's about his pure dedication to the craft of stand-up. He analogizes it to he's a big Porsche collector, and like the click his 1957 Porsche makes when he closes the door. I don't really know those cars that well, but it's the click of a craft anyway, like a well-crafted click. Or he said, I'm not familiar with what he's talking about, but cricket cages old Japanese guys make. Japan keeps coming up when you talk about this obsessive craft, and I wonder, Japan is also one of these interests you could list along with zombies, along with video games, and you live there, and it's a referent for you. How did Japan enter the picture for you?
You're right in the sense that, so like the zombies thing that sort of was this fringe culture that's become huge now, I feel like Japanophiles, this idea of liking Japanese animation or Japanese manga or comics or whatever, that was a fringe thing for a while, and now it's not. Now it's completely mainstream. So that's interesting that parallel has happened. I've always loved Japanese culture. I've always been interested in samurai and ninjas and like just the feudal Japan always interested me. But then in addition to that, I love, like, my favorite animators are Miyazaki. His like they call him the Japanese Walt Disney, but in so many ways he's infinitely better. But so I've always dug that. I'm not actually really that into traditional anime. Like, I don't get into Pokemon. I don't get into a lot. So it's weird. Like, I'm not really...
I'm sure there's somebody who would take up Pokemon being traditional anime, but continue.
Good point. No, that's the thing. Like, that's how little I know about all that, right? But I was interested enough to know that I wanted to go there and experience that culture firsthand. I also have always been really disappointed in myself and maybe just America in general for not putting any emphasis on learning another language. We are so privileged and lucky that most of the world speaks our language, and we kind of expect it. You were talking...
Except Japan.
Yes. Yes. Well, the weird thing about Japan, I feel bad for, because Germany, there are other countries that speak German. France, there are other countries that speak French as part of their normal thing. No one else speaks Japanese unless they learn it,
Well, there's like 140 million of them in total, so there's like they have people to talk to.
Absolutely.
But I know what you mean.
But I guess I'm saying, like, yeah, outside of the island of Japan, you're not going to natively find that language anywhere else the way that you would with, some of the other.
Right. Like French is a very common second language, so
Yes.
a French person can get by.
Yes, French, German, Spanish, any of those. So anyway, that was the other thing. As I said, I can't be this way. I can't be the guy that only knows one language. Like, that's embarrassing. So, but it's hard. It's hard to learn another language. And I thought that living in Japan for a year and a half would cure me of that. And I got a pretty good start. I can definitely have a pretty cool conversation with a 5-year-old about dragons and talking turtles. But, outside of that, it didn't really.
It just takes going back and not teaching English, not being in an English-speaking environment. I mean, you went there and taught English. Was that the goal, to be like, you know what, I'm just going to teach English? And was it one of these things like, I'm just going to put everything on pause and go teach English in Japan, or what?
No, teaching English was the only thing I could do to get to Japan. That was the only way I could get a sponsored visa to stay there more than, a couple weeks. I had no interest in teaching English. But what happened was, when I was there, I realized that we in America have a horrible system for teaching foreign language. Horrible system. And, the company I taught for was not a good, it was a very like chain restaurant style approach to teaching English. But having said that, there was something about it. There was this immersion that happened, that we forced our students to speak only English, and we started off with flashcards, and we started off, we didn't.
Helps to get non-Japanese speaking English teachers.
Yes, exactly. No, exactly. And the problem was they actually actively discouraged me from using any Japanese, which was fine. I totally understand that. I cheated. Like, I did as much as I could. But what I enjoyed about, anyway, if I had another life to live and I wasn't going to be an artist musician, I would definitely try to reinvent the way that languages are taught. And I know that there's things like Rosetta Stone, and they're trying the immersion idea. But even that, like, my method for learning Japanese myself was I just went out and bought a ton of children's books, because that's mirroring how, we learned our native language, right?
It's kind of the thrill of learning to read again, like you had when you were a kid. That was a very exciting time for me. And I have it again in, Korean more recently. It's like, hey, I learned to read that a while ago, but at the time it was like, hey, it was a feeling that I'd forgot about because I hadn't, learned to read in 20 years.
Oh, absolutely. I think there's a lot of pros for that approach, and one is that it's repetitive. You're going to see a lot of the same simple vocabulary popping up over and over again. The dog is fast, the dog is hungry, the dog is brown, But in addition to that, there's stories, and that's the real key. When you're learning, all the other resources I found of how to learn Japanese were all like how to get around, how to ask for directions, where's the bathroom, where's the restaurant. Like, okay, that's great, but there's no story there, there's no context. When I'm learning about Urashima Taro, and I'm learning about like this guy that lives under the water with a turtle, and rides him around, or I learned about Isenboshi, this little tiny samurai that's like literally an inch tall. Like, there's a story there now. Now I'm engaged, and I need to learn these words to find out what happens in this story, So, yeah, there's a lot of good stuff that goes along with that I think all of that is missed. The way that we teach here is painful. It's a torture. It's basically waterboarding.
Perfunctory as well. Like, you got to take this 4 years of Spanish. Don't worry, just forget it after you're done. I don't care.
That's exactly it. It's this idea that you
need this.
Yep. Yeah, you're paying your dues and then you're going to move on. I hate that, because I do want to need that. I study.
That's the key. You do have to need it. You do have to be in an environment where you need it to really get it.
No, that's exactly right. And that's why your point of going back and not teaching English, not surrounding myself with English speakers, is the only way to really get ahead in that language. I think, when you live somewhere and you're forced to buy toilet paper in a native language, that's when you're really, using it.
Well, language learning is, as I've discovered as I've got more into it, in a lot of ways the same as any other endeavor, is to make something. In a way, you're sort of making a new version of yourself when you learn a language. But when you're making a video game, or you're making art, when you're making music, you have to do it. Something, we talk about deadlines, but you have to give yourself no choice, right? Ultimately.
Yeah, and I think that either happens naturally, like in my case with making art and making music, it's a compulsion for me. It isn't a choice. I simply have to do it.
Freak out if you didn't do it.
I honestly freak out, and a lot of people don't realize that. No, I'm glad you said that. Like, I used to go home and visit my parents, and if I stayed there for more than 4 days, I would start to like visibly, I needed my guitar, I needed my paints, there's nothing against them. I had to get back. I had to get back to my studio,
You had ideas to get out.
I had ideas, and the worst thing was they were collecting the longer I was away. And so
it's like a video game. One of those levels where the water goes up and you have to get away from it. And sooner or later, it hits the ceiling.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, I had a health meter and then a creativity meter.
Game over at some point.
That meter was full. No, that's exactly right. And I think so for me, it's always been a compulsion. For me, it's always been a need more than a want. It's a want too. And sometimes they battle, and sometimes one wins out. But the other side of that is if that's not true all the time, then you have to make it a need. I had a conversation with one of my really good friends, Brendan, growing up, where I was working on an art project, and it was getting very tedious. It was very like a lot of busy work. The fun part was over, and now it was work. And he was like, "Why are you doing that if it's not fun?" He's like, "I don't understand why you're drawing if it's not fun. You should only do it if it's fun for you." And that was a foreign idea to me, because there's always parts of every project that I'm not going to enjoy, but I enjoy the end result, or I enjoy the whole thing enough. So I tried to explain that to him, that it wasn't about that, and I don't think I really did a very good job of it, but I'm still thinking about that conversation to this day, because I think maybe that is what separates. You were saying you look back behind your building, there's this wake of projects that you didn't finish, right? Like
the arms and legs and torsos of unfinished projects.
Exactly, this little Frankenstein construction kit that eventually will maybe add up to something. Well, that's the other thing is
one day you can maybe put them together and build something functional.
Exactly. Big picture. When you look back at the whole timeline of your life, you realize that those things did add up to something, and you learned something from that. But
it's like the DIY shows that didn't pay for themselves in the moment. Well, maybe they paid for themselves over 20 years.
Yeah, exactly. Or if they didn't, they taught me something about myself. One, they taught me that I could actually finish a series of 20 paintings on a single theme. Maybe that's something I didn't know I could do. It also taught me that I could engage a group of 300 people and have them come in and look at nothing but my art, and that worked. Like for me, so even on a like ego, and sometimes that's just as important as anything else, just to remind you, hey, you're worth doing this. This is something, you have something to give, and it's worth it. People want to people want you to share this with them, and I think that's the biggest thing about. And this wouldn't have happened if not for the internet for me. But the biggest thing that I've learned is the fan base of No More Kings. Every day, they rejuvenate me and remind me that what I'm doing is worthwhile. Because it's easy when you're stuck in it. Constantly, I'm like, what the heck am I doing? Nobody cares. Why am I doing this? You know what I mean? Like, it's not that good. Like, whatever. Just all the self-doubt that comes over with every artist. And then just when I'm feeling the worst about it, I'll open, a browser, and there'll be a note from a No More Kings fan who says, your song got me through a really dark time. Or, and I'm just like, oh, man. That's why I'm doing this.
It's important to note that it's not just someone saying, hey, this song rocks. Like, that's cool. But the real sort of, not praise, but like the really valuable stuff comes from, that you say someone says a song got them through something, or someone has like a good memory attached to your song, or it inspired, most of all, like if you did something that inspired someone to make something else. That's kind of the ultimate thing, right?
Yeah, that's my favorite, because I think about, I wanted so badly to do what Jim Henson did when I was younger, and I realized if he didn't do that, if he decided to become a dentist instead, and I never had the Muppets to watch, Saturday night, and I never aspired to do what he did, what a loss that would be, and I think about that for every creator. And finally, I applied that to myself. I realized exactly what you just said. Like, for someone to say that rocks, that's cool, that's awesome, but his world isn't different from me having made that. For someone to say that a song I wrote got them through a time, and that if I didn't write that song, who knows? Like that's cool, because now I realize, holy crap, I had to write that song.
Point to something.
I can point to something and say, this
stuff is different.
Yeah, this is why that exists. Right. Exactly.
Like, I wouldn't be listening to this song someone else wrote if they hadn't heard my song in the first place, or what have. Usually one medium inspires a different. Well, that's the coolest, right? When you wrote a song, but somebody then made a movie that was inspired by it, right? It's not it's cool if somebody wrote a song inspired by your song, but it's better if they move it to another domain, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's what I'm doing, right? That's how this, like, the song came from me being inspired by a movie. Like, I was inspired by The Karate Kid to write a song
It goes
about.
back to a movie. That's pretty cool.
That would be really cool.
Is it important to you to live in Los Angeles, not just for the reasons we've discussed, but because here, more than seemingly anywhere else I've been, there's this freedom where you can do anything you want, not just like sort of reach for the rainbow type, you can do whatever you want, but you can go in any direction you want and no one will object. Like, I haven't been in a city like that before. Do you get what I mean about Los Angeles?
Absolutely. And I think even more than no one will object, there are other people that are doing it too.
Right.
And that you can connect
Always
to.
a precedent, no matter what.
Always a precedent, and there's always a workout buddy. You know, there's always someone that you can connect to and they can hold you accountable, or they can show you the ropes, or they can just be like, yeah, this is possible here. Or if you're entering a new era, there's some... I think the thing I love most about Los Angeles, and I felt this a little bit in Tokyo as well, there's this electric sense of potential here. That even if you're not actively doing something, you can feel it in the air, like it's out there. There's this potential. I wake up, I walk out of my house, I don't know what could happen. You know what I mean? Like I could
think of that as ambient ambition. Like it's
Yes.
There's just in the air. There's some cities which are cool cities. I think of what's a good example of a city that's cool, but where that's sort of lacking. Oh, I don't know, Vancouver. I like Vancouver a lot. I don't want to bag on it, but you don't get the sense that there's the ambition in the air. There's cool towers and cool places to eat, beaches and whatnot, but the ambition is not there. Vancouver's nicer than Los Angeles in many ways, but you don't feel that in the air, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying Vancouver, but there's cities like that.
every other, I mean, the only other place I felt even close to this has been Nashville, and I think for a different reason. But yeah, Nashville had this sense of everyone there is just bursting with this musical intensity that they want to get out, New York even doesn't really have it for me as much because there's so much else in New York, and I think people are, this is terrible, I'm not I'm not at all slighting New York, but I feel like it's easy to get caught up in the rat race in New York a little differently than out here.
Currents that are already going, and if you can surf those currents, go to New York.
Yep.
If you can't, you might want to go somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a reason why this is sort of the old West, out here. This is the gold rush happened out here. There's like a gold rush of creativity
Still
now.
the frontier in some sense.
It absolutely is. And it's exactly what you said. There's so much unclaimed ground here that you can still walk out there with a flag and plant it and say, all right, this is mine now. But yeah, that sense of that. What was the phrase you just used?
Ambient ambition.
Yeah, exactly. I think the ambition part of that is what's important. I think other places are just as cool and have as much inspiration and cool things, but I don't feel the same way about the people that are there. Almost everybody, not everybody, but there's a huge percentage of people that are here because they came here from somewhere else for that reason, to pursue acting or to make films or to make music or to make art, but they came.
They didn't
here.
just sort of wind up here.
They didn't wind up here, and they're not trapped here. They chose it. And it's just really interesting to me that this and New York. Again, I feel like New York's that way, and maybe Nashville is for songwriters, but there are these places where people know that's the Mecca, right? That's the place I got to go if I want to do this thing. And that's, I don't know, as much as we talked before about the walls coming down and the geography, all that going away, I think we'll never truly get away from that. I think there will always be places like Los Angeles that you just have to be here.
Right. You don't. The geography gets weaker in one way and stronger in another. But you mentioned Tokyo, and that sense of there is that sense of possibility. But there's a layer on there where if you're a foreigner in Tokyo, and I experience this in Japan and Korea as well, you're not bound up by the fact that there's a right way and a wrong way for Japanese people. In a sense, and this might be a reason that you want to spend more time in Japan, to be a foreigner there is to experience a whole other level of freedom, like in a strange way.
No, absolutely. And I think all the stuff that I would enjoy and did enjoy about Tokyo maybe wouldn't happen for a person who was born there. I think you're absolutely right. We, as foreigners there, we get away with a lot more. Also because we're special. I lived in Budapest for 6 months and no one looked twice at me. I looked like I could have been Hungarian, But I lived in Japan for a year and a half and I could not go anywhere without getting stared at. Because I look different, You're taller than the average person. You just look different. So already eyes are on you. Already you're special. Already people want to talk to you, just by the virtue of you're different. Where did you come from? So it's much easier to go there and try to stand out and make something, as an artist, as a musician, whatever. It was so easy for me to start a band and get people to come to see shows there. Easier than Los Angeles, for sure. where you're competing against, billions of other bands trying to get people to go.
But they're all in their own sector, culturally and geographically in Los Angeles, so you have to think about it that way, too. In a way, Los Angeles is like the internet. There's so many interests here, and so many nodes. Like, it's the most internet-like city that I've experienced. I don't know, that just came off the top of my head, but do you think that's true? Do you think it is like that?
I think it is like, it reminds me of the early days of GeoCities, where when you signed up for GeoCities to pick your homepage, you had to pick a section of town, and it was either like the music section, the art section, the cooking section. I think LA is like that. Like,
It's the GeoCity.
This is a GeoCity still.
Now, tell me at this point, what do you see? How do you see the balance between no more kings, between visual art, game making? Are they all sort of on an equal plane now, or do they sort of jostle for position for you?
Wow, I think they're always going to jostle. I think there's always going to be one thing that's sort of leading the pack for me, and maybe that's dangerous. I'm not really sure yet. Right now, I'm super into games. Like, I'm super into, and not just video games, but I've really started getting into making board games now. And I feel like you can do stuff in indie board games that you can't do in video games anymore. And for me, indie board games are what video games were maybe 10 years ago. This real, that's the new frontier where you can try all these crazy things. And we were talking earlier about Kickstarter. Kickstarter is still very friendly for board games and not so much for, people are kind of over it for films. They're kind of over it for music. Like, if I were to say, hey, No More Kings fans, our next album is going to be Kickstarted, I think maybe some people will be okay with it, but I think there'll be a lot of groans. There'll be a lot of people like, oh, come on. But
Still working for podcasts.
Yes.
So far, so good. I don't ask for much.
Good. Well, that's part of it. No, I think, and this is why I like considering it for a board game thing. I think there's still so much potential. I don't know that. I expected more things to pop up, but Kickstarter sort of owns the marketplace still in that sense. But the idea of crowd-funded content, I think, is the strongest thing that's come out in the past couple of years, because, and that's what's so scary about this idea of challenging net neutrality soon. Right now, until this changes, you or I have the same ability to reach an audience as NBC or as a major network, and that's really exciting.
I think you mentioned the board game thing. It started linking up in my head with all the other innovations going in. 3D printing alone is going to be the world's greatest development for indie board games. I mean, it's going to be insane.
That's where it's going to be used the most. It's funny because when it first came out, I thought there's got to be something here, and I just didn't see anything worthwhile coming out of it yet. Of course, every new technology has that, right? That initial phase where it's like,
this sucks.
Yeah, all the babies are ugly, right? Like, this is like
Twitter. What's Twitter?
What is that? 140
Writing about your breakfast.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my God, I was thinking about Twitter on the way down here, how important and valuable that's become just as a news source. Like, think about, not to turn this into a political thing, but like what's going on in Ferguson right now. We wouldn't know about it. We just wouldn't know about it because they're literally blocking the media out. We only know about it because of Twitter. And I thought about the last Olympics. Like, we are getting a real-time feed now. You used to have to wait until the next morning till we would cover it because they're still doing stuff while we're dark.
And you got what your country wanted to show.
Yes, that was the other part. Yes, I didn't realize that.
Where your country won. Depending on the country you live in, sometimes you'd get highlights of your country's victories, sometimes few, depending on where you were.
Yeah, and then the rest was just like footnotes in a ticker at the bottom of the screen.
Test pattern.
Exactly. No, I love things like Twitter. I love this idea that every human now is a potential news reporter. Everyone out there with an active cell phone is, an information provider. And yeah, the thing about crowdfunding and Kickstarter and all these things is what's great about that is you're reaching an audience directly now. You could not have done this back in my incompetent ninja game maker days. If there was a thing as Kickstarter, that would have been great. Not only is the reach big enough, but you can that Venn diagram of where the very small interests intersect. You can find those people now.
Those are your funders.
Those are your funders. And they don't have to be in the same area as you. I remember like Lord British with Ultima. Yeah, he literally Xeroxed his thing up with a floppy and put it in a Ziploc and had to hand it out to people. That's the only way he could sell this game. Now his
internet was his car. He was just going around.
His internet was a Volvo, yeah. And now, we have our exact audience, tailor-made audience, people that want the exact thing that we want, right there. And we only need 1,000 of them. We don't, because that's the problem with. I noticed this mostly with products. I guess board games falls under this, but it was like iPhone cases and certain things like that for a while. the demand wasn't big enough for a manufacturer to really make this thing available at Walmart. You know, it just didn't exist there. But you definitely had 1,000 people that wanted this, and that's all you needed to make the minimum run. And you're right, with board games, that's going to be exciting, and especially with 3D printing, because that's the only area that board games are tough, is the minimum run. If I want to make, like, one of the games I'm making now needs custom dice. For me to get custom dice made, I need to make 10,000 of them. Like, what the? I can't afford 10,000 dice. Where am I going to put 10,000 dice?
It's the storage issue at this
That's
point.
the big, I'm going to make furniture out of it and sit on it. But if I could guarantee pre-sales by having a Kickstarter and a bunch of people, if I've got, 1,000 people, and each game takes 10 dice, then I'm set,
When we were training before to paint the night black, was it the right track? We got all decked out for war and got the lights back and took a slight nap. Thought it was for breaking bones, but balls don't fight back. The dragon strikes back. Don't want to mess with no dragon.
People bemoan. I was thinking of, you've seen this GIF series, this meme, Old Economy Steve, right?
No.
Where it's this kid. It's a school photograph of a kid in the late 70s. He's a teenager, a high schooler, and he's got the sort of 70s hair and the medallion and all that. And over the GIF, people put different words, like it's all a satire of baby boomers and what the economy they got, like complains his kids are lazy, bought a house at 22, that sort of thing. Or let me pull up Old Economy Steve on the phone. As you can see, Old Economy Steve says things like, drives up federal deficit for 30 years, hands the bill to his kids, graduates from college, gets hired, got my dream job by responding to a classified ad. So lamenting an economy that didn't last that long in the first place.
Right.
But I think about this in terms of the sort of cultural mainstream. People lament, there's no good music on FM radio anymore. There's no good mega blockbusters. It's like, well, but there's so much other cool stuff. And especially with this Old Economy Steve thing, I laugh at it, but nervously, because I know I wouldn't have done very well in the old economy. Like, that wouldn't have been my place. And culturally, it wouldn't have been our place. I mean, people like us should be happy the mainstream is gone, right?
Yeah.
In some sense.
Well, the other side of that is, you say, and I find myself doing this too, there's nothing good on the radio anymore, there's no good movies anymore. That's not true. Right. There's just as good stuff on the radio now.
Too much good stuff all around.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think, no, this is for more reasons than I can count, this is a very exciting time to be alive. Right. And you're right, the old economy, yeah, okay, that was, it doesn't matter. If we grew up in the 50s, if we grew up in the 20s, like, that's what your environment is. It's it's the creative limitations. Like, people found a way to make, in some way, I don't envy this at all, but in some way I feel like it was easier, like, as an artist in the 60s, you could stand out, you could make something really wild and crazy, and then everybody was talking about you, and you were the it artist, right? Now, it's harder to stand out because all that stuff's been done. So in some ways, it's harder, especially as a musician, it's harder to stand out. You've got so much competition. So in some ways, it's harder living now in this sort of time. But because of the resources at our fingertips, because of, you can do an online grassroots thing now that, going back to the Lord British handing out stuff, like, that only worked because people wanted to play the games that he was making in his area. With me and No More Kings in New England, I was lucky that I had that, but no one in, with the exception of you, no one on this side of the country knew who the heck I was, Now I've got, a lot of people who care about what the heck I'm doing, and that is only possible because of this new economy. It's only possible because of the new internet landscape.
Right. I mean, you've got a Back to the Future shirt on right now. It's like the 80s produced some fun stuff. In the U.S., Japan as well, very cool stuff there. But for this and other reasons, I'm glad I'm not in the 80s, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, for me, it was a great time to grow up. But I'm glad I'm not 40 in the 80s. I'm glad I'm 40 now. Right. I'm glad that this is the time where I have all that stuff to draw from. That's my, toolbox. But this is where I'm making it, and it's
The
getting
way the 80s are still here, because all the stuff is still here.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. Literally and figuratively. Like, there literally are things that, but then figuratively, like, the influence of the 80s on music, the influence on... Like, if you think about... there was a little bit of synthesizer earlier than that, but, like, if not for the 80s... Like, we have music now that the only human element is the voice, is the lyrics. Everything else is a sine wave. Everything else is, ones and zeros.
And the voice goes through a filter often.
Actually, you're right. In a lot of cases, it's tuned, and yeah. So that stuff is exciting, and that I feel like came out of the 80s. I feel like we were looking at because the Emmys, I think we were looking at like a fashion slideshow through the years, and I feel like the 80s was still pretty fun, like pretty funky. The 90s got really boring, really fast,
Yeah, I don't know what happened, but they're exciting again now. Things came back around, right?
Exactly. Yeah, the pendulum swings. But this is, for so many reasons, this is a really exciting time to live. As a creator, as a consumer, as a zombie fan.
Sure. As all these things. I've been speaking here in Pasadena, California with Pete Mitchell. He is the co-founder, lead singer of the band No More Kings, whose new album 3 came out this year. He is an artist. He is a game designer, a board game designer in the making. What's the next thing we can expect from you? Whether it be game, whether it be music, whether it be anything.
Well, there's a couple things that I'm working on, and I hope that I don't abandon them the way that I'm known. But right now, I'm finishing.
We're not 11 anymore.
I don't know. I feel like I still am. Yeah. So, yes, I'm finishing up my first board game. It's about being a snake eating mice and trying to be the longest snake you can be, to be longer than your opponent's snake. So that's one thing in progress. I'm finishing up my first solo album of cover songs. And then I just started working on a graphic novel adaptation of Beowulf, because for some reason, I've always been really obsessed with that story and poem. So those are the 3 things that I'm currently churning out. I still have high hopes to finish an animation, a full feature-length animation someday. I don't know. It sucks because I don't want to say these things and then listen later and go, oh, I never did those things. But yeah, that's the stuff I'm working on now.
If people can keep up, where should they go to keep an eye on this stuff?
The best place to find stuff that I'm doing is daspety.com, DASPETEY. That's sort of my homepage for the stuff that isn't necessarily No More Kings related. But nomorkings.com is always a great place too, because I run that site and I always shamelessly use it for my own stuff as well as No More King stuff.
That's the way you gotta do it these days. Pete Mitchell, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Colin. It's been a pleasure.
This has been Notebook on Cities and Culture. I've been Colin Marshall. You can keep up with the cultural creators, internationalists, and observers of the urban scene on the show at colinmarshall.org. Thanks. Special thanks to everyone who backed Season 4 on Kickstarter, including Joel Neville Anderson, Daniel Levin Becker, Paige Calvert, Commander Manvark, Jonathan Crow, John Cunningham, David Dawes, James DeVito, Tim Dobbs, Paul Doyle, Jake Elliott, Kevin Emmett, Lawrence English, Jonathan Filbert, Andrew Philippone Jr., Michael Fransky, John French, Themistocles Eucrucius, Will Graham, Umberto Grant, Samuel Hansen, David Hayes, Jeff Hillenbrand, Mark Hines, Andrew Johnstone, Tadeusz Andrzej Kodlubowski, Peter Kavanaugh, Ted Kane, Andy Cooney, Evan Landman, Alfred Lee, James Maloney, Sean McDonald, Alberto Bruzos Moro, Jason Miller, Rob Montz, Daniel Murphy, Richard Nash, Aidan Nullman, Patrick O'Flaherty, Danny Olson, Michael O'Regan, Ian Blosker, Christopher Porter, MJ Pritchett, Piers Rippey, Rob Schultz, Todd Shimoda, Cam Smith, Deborah Smith, Adam Sutherland, Maureen Kincaid Speller, Anna Traher, Thomas Unterberger, Matt Warren, Nick Weigelt, Dion Wolf, Cynthia Yang, and Wayne Wright.